I would say, a huge example of awful, horrendous spending, negligent spending, actually. I think it is negligent from our government to be doing this, nearly £6 million a day in total, if not more, depending on how you cut it, is spent per day on hotels. There's an example that's in the press a lot today. A row is brewing because in London, central London, I have to say, you've got a group of these people, illegal migrants, refugees, whatever you want to call them. We can argue about the terminology. They are busy camping outside the hotel. This is the scene that you're seeing on your screens now. Basically, they were moved from a hotel in Essex. And now where they've been presented in this new hotel, it's 4 to a room, so 2 sets of bunk beds, basically. They're not happy. They don't like the facilities. They're saying it's smelly. As I understand it, apparently the food's all right, so that's not bad. Wi-Fi is a bit slow. And out on the street, they are staying. Daniel, what do you make to this?
Well, it's a really interesting flashpoint, isn't it, now? Because if they hold out, the Home Office has to face up to about 3 choices, really. One is to find better accommodation for them at no doubt higher cost. I just don't think the public is going to wear that. I just don't think they are. At a time when we have homeless people living in bed and breakfast, and to say you're entitled to a private hotel room of your own with an ensuite bathroom, and so I just don't think the public are going to wear that. The second is they could try and cajole them to go back into the place and try and persuade them. I don't think they're going to, maybe they'll be successful in doing that. And the third is just to turn their back on them and say you can live on the streets in that case, which is not necessarily ideal either. I can't see any other way out of this now for the Home Office.
What do you make to it, Matthew?
This is an emotional topic for me because on one side of my family, we come from refugee grandparents. My grandparents were refugees from Hitler, from Vienna, and my great-great-uncle on my dad's side was killed by the Gestapo. He was the first person to die under the Gestapo in Austria. One of the people who is doing this protesting, I read up in the article, comes from Iran, and he would have been hanged had he stayed in Iran. So I think something like 60%, it may be as high as 80% of people who have been coming over the channel on boats eventually get refugee status. Their asylum claims are accepted. So the majority of these people, whether it's a sort of smaller majority or an overwhelming majority, are genuine refugees fleeing the sort of horrors that my grandparents fled. You don't have to compare the Holocaust to anything else to realise that dying at the hands of the Gestapo isn't much difference to dying at the hands of the Ayatollahs in Iran or the horror in Syria under the evil of Bashar al-Assad's regime. So I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for the people involved in these struggles. You said earlier before the break, Michelle, that it was a tiny fraction of the immigration figures, the number of Ukrainians that we took in. I was absolutely full square behind taking in Ukrainians as a country, and so many people around the country were incredibly generous in doing so. It wasn't actually that small a figure. It was something like the third highest proportion of the immigration figures were refugees coming from Ukraine. What is a relatively tiny fraction of the immigration figures are the numbers of people coming here seeking asylum. It was something like 8%. This is whipped up on an ongoing basis by TV shows, by newspapers and so forth, because it gets clicks, because it generates viewers, because it generates outrage, and from the government's point of view, because it distracts from the fact, as I keep saying, that nearly 11 million of us are struggling to pay our bills. On the specifics of this protest, I think we can all agree that human beings should live in humane conditions. And Daniel's absolutely right to talk about British homelessness. We have a massive problem of homelessness in this country, and that doesn't just involve people sleeping on the streets. It's people who don't have a permanent home. It is a national scandal that we haven't dealt with that. We don't want to compound that scandal by making people who are truly vulnerable, coming from overseas, fleeing despots, sleep in rooms 4 to 2 metre rooms.
So I've almost got steam coming out my ears. Right, so first things first. If you are genuinely at risk of being persecuted in Iran or wherever, you know, and I don't doubt that those horrific scenes are occurring, I've never been convinced about why, A, you would leave all your family If you're what you're describing to me is this horrendous scenario. I don't know your family circumstances, but I can tell you, if there was something horrific going on in this country, I would not be leaving my loved ones behind and scarpering. That's the first point. So I'm never convinced when they, just learn men doing this. The second point, again, if I genuinely thought I was about to be hanged in the country of origin that I was in, my primary concern, my only concern anyway, would be get to safety. As soon as I'm safe, I'd be breathing, I'd be relaxed, I'd be like, right, thank goodness for me, I'm safe. What I wouldn't imagine myself doing under any scenario is sitting there thinking, right, I'm going to be hanged, so where do I want to go in the world? Start picking and choosing, looking on Google Maps, looking at nice hotels and getting myself chuffed when my friends are telling me, look at all these facilities that you might have, rocking up to said hotel and then refusing the facility because it doesn't meet my expectations. You turn around and say, these horrific, inhumane conditions, give me a break. This is a central London hotel, and what the proposal is 2 bunk beds in a room. Now, I don't know if you've ever been backpacking and you have these backpacker dorms all over the country, and they'll exist all over the world. They'll exist in this country as well, where people hand over money to be in rooms where there's way more than 4 people in 2 bunk beds. The dorms are absolutely ginormous. I've never heard anyone say backpacker resorts and dorms are inhumane. They're like animals. I find it ridiculous.
In 1999, I think it was, I travelled for 2 months in Latin America and South America, and I spent 800 quid in 8 countries, right, over a 9-week period. So I know what it's like to rough it. I was paying about the equivalent of £1 a night so that I could have a drink on a Friday night and go salsa dancing. Yeah. So I know what it's like to rough it.
Right, was it inhumane? When you went to these dorms for your £1 a night, did you sit there going to the hostel owners, this is inhumane, you've got 4 bunk beds in this room, this is inhumane, I wouldn't be treated like as if I was an animal?
So by the way, we should treat, and we'll come on to animals later, we should treat animals well. I was a 19-year-old learning my way in the world, and I took value from that experience. It's entirely different from someone who is, as I've described, been threatened with being hanged in their home country and then having to live with 3 other men or 3 other human beings inside a tiny room. That's not human.
They were safe
so let's
in
deal
France.
with that
they were
second
not about
point.
To get hung in France.
Okay, none of us, and you included, would want to be put up 4 to a room where there's a 2-metre square room. None of us. You wouldn't, I wouldn't, if we're going to try and imagine ourselves into these circumstances. Secondly, it's really, I think, difficult for any of us, including me as a grandson of refugees, to imagine what it's like to be kicked out of your house, to be kicked out of your country. So to blame these people for leaving, we don't know their individual circumstances. Their wife may have been safe in Iran. We simply don't know. It's really difficult to judge. That's about empathy. And then finally, I just think this idea that they should stick in France, it is under international law, it is not a legal requirement to seek refuge in the first safe country that you reach.
But if you're fearing your life, then you get to where you're safe.
Yes.
And I would support you being safe. What do you do then? When you sit there and then start going, oh, actually, no, that's better. Actually, no, I prefer that one. Then that's where you lose me.
Do you not think that we're a bit further away from Iran than France, we're a bit further away from Syria than France and Italy? Do you think that only Italy, only France, only Germany, or perhaps only Greece, because they're really very close to Syria, that those countries should take all of the refugees? No, we have to spread it out. It's about our international responsibilities, Michelle.
I don't really care about the responses of places like Italy. I care about the responses of the UK. I suspect that you guys will have an opinion on that topic.
I might too.
And Daniel might as well. I know I got onto a rant. Sorry, Daniel. When I come back, I'll let you respond.
No, I don't think I'm blaming you, Michelle. You were very brief in what you said.
He's polite, isn't he? I'll let